Hello and welcome to the latest Aston Originals. Today I'm joined by Dr. Mohammed Azmat, also known as Azzy, who is Assistant Professor of Logistics and Supply Chain Management within the Department of Engineering Systems and Supply Chain Management at Aston University. Now, recently, Azzy had an article published in The Conversation called Drones and Driverless Cars Could Help with Ukraine's Humanitarian Crisis. And today we're going to explore that topic in a bit more detail. So, Azzy, first of all, could you tell me, what do we mean when we talk about a disaster?
Well, Nicola, thank you so much for letting me on board and talk about these very important issues, especially what we see and what's going on in the Ukraine at the moment. And we academics try to sort of find some better ways of supporting people and humans in such a distress situation. Disaster itself is a kind of an event where lots of disruptions happen. You just stop living your normal day-to-day life, and it requires, for that particular reason, very different kind of logistics and supply chain. Humanitarian logistics and supply chain is the area which sort of covers that section. Usually when you are in certain war situation, or if there is some sort of a natural disaster, and any earthquake, flooding, or stuff like that. So these are the areas that we sort of look into and try to find the most efficient and effective way of transporting goods and supplies to the people. We call them beneficiaries because they are the people in distress, and they need some sort of help from the people around the globe. So that's what a very generic overview of disaster is, and how we operate in those circumstances.
Now, we hear of all sorts of different types of disasters. So, as regards logistics, are all disasters the same, and therefore do they require similar logistics?
Every disaster is a different disaster. When it's different in a way that if it's a sudden onset disaster, like for example an earthquake happened or something like that, or flooding or hurricane, it requires a completely different type of logistics and supply chain. And if there is sort of a slow onsets, like some sort of man-made disaster is developing, like sort of wars and stuff like that. For instance, let's take an example of Ukraine's war again, that it has been progressing for a period of time. So already everybody knew that something is going to happen. So it did not happen overnight. So people sort of knew that Russia is planning to invade Ukraine and stuff like that. And there were some images and stuff like that. So everybody got some time to prepare for this disaster one way or the other. But in the natural disaster, it happens completely opposite. It happens like abruptly, and we don't have enough warning signals and stuff. So if it's a natural disaster, we might be, and let's suppose it's flooding, we might need boats and other such equipment for assistance. Whereas in other kind of a disaster, we might need trucks and more people on ground to sort of support the activities and stuff. So these are two very different things.
Now, also looking at the logistics of saving lives, usually we think of the people who are there, who are experiencing the disaster, but also there are aid workers as well. And you've emphasised the importance of saving lives of aid workers. So how does this come into relevance?
So if we have a look at it, historically speaking, there are on average at least 100 people, 100 aid workers, I should say, they they lose their life trying to save other people, and we sort of trying to emphasize that every life matters, the life of the people who are already in a sort of a distress situation in such a conflict zone, and also of the people who are trying to provide them aid and support them in that kind of in those circumstances. If we look at it historically, and what data tells us that and in 2020 alone, like around 117 people, aid workers, died around the globe. So 117 aid workers is not only lives, but if you sort of try to compare it with the value of a statistical life, it's also a huge number. Okay, so it's not just that we are losing lives, but we are also sort of, we can calculate the economic value lost just based on the number of people who lost their lives. So what we are trying to suggest here is that there are two sides of the story. One are those people who are already in that situation and they need certain aid and assistance and medical supplies and food and water and everything else. And then there's a group B, which are aid workers who want to go there and provide those supplies to them. The part which we want to sort of skip here is providing the supplies to them. This thing could be done actually by the drones or robots, this could be done faster. And also try to think about it that if you look at it in a way that if your drone is flying and some let's say Russian army shots the drone, we lose maybe I don't know, 15-20,000 pounds. That's fine. And but if we lose a life, that's $10 million. One person's life is equivalent to $10 million. And then this is just the value of a statistical life. We cannot calculate the emotions and trauma everybody else is sort of bearing with it. And if we look at the recent example, very recently, three aid workers have died in Ukraine war. They were going with two trucks and trying to provide supplies. It really happened like a week ago or something like that. And we lost three aid workers who were just trying to support the people in this distress situation. So the idea here is that now that we have sort of advanced robotics, if we have developed several use cases for the drones and autonomous vehicles, and we are using them in the military setups and for surveillance and stuff. So this could actually be done, that we can sort of lift up the parcels and bring it to the people in different part of the Ukraine.
Okay, so we've sort of looked at what a disaster is and who you're trying to save, what and the importance of saving these lives. So looking more at the sort of logistics of it. So you refer to autonomous vehicles. It's a phrase a lot of us hear a lot of the time, but what are they? What does that mean exactly?
So, to put it in a perspective, autonomous vehicles are those vehicles which are able to drive from point A to point B on their own. They don't need any active input from the humans. So, nobody is sitting inside the car and driving it and trying to reach at certain point. So these are the vehicles. So when we say vehicles, it actually covers everything. It's trucks, cars, and drones and everything else. So autonomous vehicles are usually referred to as of the trucks and the cars on something on the road. And for the drones, we use the term unmanned aerial vehicles. So when we say unmanned aerial vehicles, it means like it could be remotely piloted. It could be something which is completely autonomous. Both of the things could work in combination with each other as well, conjunction. So this is what an autonomous vehicle is in the drone. I think many people sort of look at nowadays Tesla. There's lots of videos like the car is driving itself on the highway. So that is some degree of autonomy provided by Tesla or many other auto manufacturers to say like Mercedes, BMW, and Volvo. All of them are actually offering some degree of automation or autonomy in their cars, and they can drive for maybe 10-15 minutes on their own, and then you have to again grab the steering wheel. So that's the concept of autonomous vehicles.
And are you saying that it wouldn't be enough to have just drones operating on their own? Are you saying that we'd need to have autonomous vehicles working in cooperation as well?
So, Nicola, we have to sort of try to understand the problem here. So the problem is it goes beyond aid workers and it goes beyond just drones. So we have quite a few things that we need to consider when making this decision if you should go for a total setup where you can use autonomous vehicles and drones in combination and provide a complete autonomous solution. So this is sort of what the future might look like. But what we have observed so far, there are certain critical factors when we do the research and try to figure out like what are the challenges logistics element of the supply chain is facing. So we get to know that uh, a few of the biggest challenges is like driver shortages. So there are always driver shortages. For instance, if an incident has happened somewhere, like let's talk about if it's an earthquake happened back in 2008, there was an earthquake in Pakistan. So suddenly there was a huge demand for the lorry drivers, the truck drivers or van drivers, and the prices when there's simple supply and demand, right? So there was a lot of demand, supply was low, and the prices went huge, like really up, enormous. And I still there was money, but there were not enough people to do the job. And then again, there is the element of getting tired, and there are certain restrictions in the European market that you can't drive more than 8 or 9 hours a day and stuff, and then the rest of the time the truck is just sitting at some rest station. So it's just loss of time. So in a humanitarian setup, the loss of time is loss of lives. A few seconds could change somebody's life. It could be the difference between life and death. And that is why I sort of emphasize that we should try to if not like instantly, but we should try to go towards that future where we have a complete autonomous solutions, where everything, when we are talking about smart cities and connected everything and stuff. So we should definitely look into this side as well, that where we can actually provide assistance without any active human involvement, so that we are not sort of looking at the bottlenecks, trying to resolve the bottlenecks, for instance, and the human factor in this entire supply chain is a bottleneck, or availability of the vehicle itself as well. So yeah, this is the kind of the idea which requires a lot more attention from the academic point of view as well.
And another point I wanted to pick up on is you mentioned Tesla. So when we think of Tesla, you think of electric cars. So how does the electrification of vehicles come into this?
A very good point, actually. Nowadays that we are seeing influx of electric vehicles and electric based motors and stuff, and battery powered vehicles and whatnot, and drones and everything. So the future itself is sort of electrified. We are not, our reliance on the gasoline and everything is gonna diminish over the period of time. So the idea is that when you are sort of empowering everything with electricity, then we are actually sort of going into the future where this would become a constraint, a scarce resource. It is at the moment as well. We see that just in the current context, we have seen how electricity prices has gone up, and how Russia has stopped giving the gas required for heating up the houses and stuff, and so the electricity has become a very scarce resource. So we have to really look into it as well in the future. That this is sort of, yes, this is very good. Everything is green, and everything is like sustainable and whatnot, and it's helping. Greenhouse house gases and stuff. So an overall vision of net zero is sort of there. We understand that, but we have to also find a reasonable balance between these two things, so that just imagine about. Just put yourself into the situation where you are in a humanitarian crisis, and you need to supply something to the beneficiaries, which are in a very difficult area. And even if it's an earthquake, it's a war, it's anything else, the first thing which is damaged is the infrastructure. We have seen in the Ukraine war, we have seen it in Afghanistan's war, we have seen it in all the earthquakes. There is no electricity, there is no proper facilities, roads and stuff available there. So when the infrastructure is lost, how are you, and everything is electrified, how do you imagine providing them with any sort of assistance? What kind of backup generators would you be requiring for all the electricity that is needed? and it's not like, it's not like a household thingy. It's a car needs the sort of electricity which is required by 6 or 7 houses at once, because we talk about in 150 kilowatt hour or 200 kilowatt hour battery charging speeds and stuff like that. So we have to look into this thing. It's a good thing. It's a very, very good thing, and I'm a very strong believer and promoter of this thing, that we are going into the society which is more green, and we are trying to maintain everything. At the same time, we have to also think and consider that if there are certain policies and regulations made for normal day-to-day life, where, for example, in the UK after 2030, there would be a ban on selling the diesel trucks or cars and stuff like that. But at the same time, we have to think, we have to sort of develop policies and regulations. There has to be a use case for the gasoline enabled cars and stuff, and for certain a case or test case scenarios or something like that. So this is the whole idea behind the notion of electrification and humanitarian logistics.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. I'm now going to ask you to get your crystal ball out. And could you tell us, what do you think is the future of humanitarian logistics? How do you see things developing in the future?
So you see that the future has sort of to do with the history. Like I say, we sort of, when in a scientific community, when we are doing a research, we are basing the basis of our research is usually the data we have gathered from the past, right? So we have seen in the 19th century, early 19th century, this all started the revolution in terms of having a humanitarian organization which is unbiased, and will help humans in need, and in the disaster situations of one sort or the other. So ever since then, we have seen that these humanitarian organizations have adopted and embraced technology in one way or the other. So be it in terms of sort of microfinancing, giving them some sort of vouchers through their mobile phones, which they can use in the instead of money, and or something like that. So they are the first use cases which we have practically seen, and they have worked really well in the past. So I see that going forward, humanitarian organizations would definitely embrace the technological development that we are seeing in the transportation side, especially in past we have already conducted one of the researches where five biggest organizations actually suggested that they would be happy about using the drones in their operations at first, and then later from 2025 to 30 they would see the readiness level of the autonomous vehicle technology, and maybe incorporate that as well. So I see the future is going to be very interesting when it comes to humanitarian organizations. I think they would be able to embrace this technology and use it for the good of the mankind, and we will see how things sort of roll over. The crystal ball is not going to tell me anything more than that. What we have already sort of gathered from the organizations.
Okay. And as I mentioned, you can read your article in the conversation, and the article is called Drones and Driverless Cars Could Help with Ukraine's Humanitarian Crisis. So, Azzy, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nicola, for inviting me. It was lovely talking to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.